The engine goes silent at 5,000 feet. No power, no restart. For the next 7 minutes, there's only one question that matters. How far can this plane glide? And where can it land? The answer isn't just a number. It's a constantly shrinking circle on the map, a decision tree with branches closing by the second, and the difference between a successful forced landing and running out of options. Every pilot practices engine failures, but the training scenario usually involves a convenient airport already in gliding range. Real-world engine failures don't work that way. They happen over forests, mountains, open water, and urban areas where the nearest suitable landing site might be at the edge of what's possible. Understanding glide performance isn't academic. It's the foundation of every decision made after the engine quits. Where to turn, when to turn, what altitude reserves are needed, and critically, when to stop trying for that airport and commit to the field below. NTSB data shows that a significant percentage of engine failure accidents happen not because the aircraft couldn't glide to a survivable landing area, but because pilots misjudged their glide range and either turned back when they shouldn't have, or tried to stretch the glide beyond the aircraft's capabilities. This isn't about theory. It's about practical, conservative numbers that work when adrenaline is high and altitude is running out. Numbers that account for real-world conditions, pilot reaction time, and the turbulence that always seems to appear at the worst moment. Glide ratio is deceptively simple. For every unit of altitude lost, how far forward does the aircraft travel? A Cessna 172 has a glide ratio of approximately 9:1. That means from 1,000 feet above ground level, it can glide about 9,000 feet forward, which is roughly 1.5 nautical miles. Here's the practical rule for a Cessna 172. Take the altitude in thousands of feet, multiply by 1.5, and that's the approximate glide distance in nautical miles. At 5,000 feet AGL, that's 7.5 nautical miles. At 8,000 feet, it's 12 nautical miles. But not all aircraft are created equal. A Piper Cherokee has a similar ratio, around 9:1. A Cirrus SR-22, with its sleeker design, manages about 10:1. Older Piper Cubs, with all that drag from fixed gear and struts, might only achieve 7:1, or 8:1. High-performance singles like the Mooney M20 can reach 11:1. From 5,000 feet AGL, these differences matter enormously. The Piper Cub might have a 6 nautical mile radius. The Cessna 172 has 7.5 miles. The Cirrus State Route 22 reaches 8.3 miles. That extra 2 nautical miles for the Cirrus could be the difference between reaching an airport or settling for a field. These numbers assume one critical thing. The aircraft is flown at its best glide speed. For most training aircraft, that's between 65 and 75 knots. Fly faster than best glide, and the glide ratio deteriorates. Fly slower, and it gets even worse, potentially leading to a stall. Best glide speed needs to be marked, memorized, and ingrained. When the engine fails, there's no time to look it up in the POH. The immediate action is pitch for best glide speed while simultaneously looking for landing options. Testing by flight schools has shown that even a 5-knot deviation from best glide speed can reduce glide distance by 10 to 15%. At 5,000 feet, that's losing over a nautical mile of range. It's the difference between making the runway numbers and hitting the fence. None of these numbers account for density altitude yet, but it matters. At high density altitude, the true airspeed for best glide is higher than indicated airspeed. The aircraft is moving through thinner air faster, and while the glide ratio remains theoretically the same, ground speed increases, which actually improves glide distance in no-wind conditions. However, this is a minor factor compared to what comes next: wind. Because wind doesn't just modify glide distance slightly, it can cut it in half, or double it, depending on direction. A 20-knot headwind transforms glide performance dramatically. That Cessna 172, gliding at 70 knots best glide speed, now has a ground speed of only 50 knots. The glide ratio through the air remains 9:1, but over the ground it's been reduced to roughly 6:1 or worse. From 5,000 feet with a 20-knot headwind, instead of 7.5 nautical miles, the aircraft might only make 5 nautical miles over the ground. That's a 30% reduction. 2.5 miles of range just disappeared. Conversely, a 20-knot tailwind extends that range significantly. Ground speed increases to 90 knots, and the glide distance can stretch to 10 nautical miles or more. This is why knowing wind direction at altitude is critical immediately after engine failure. The practical takeaway: always favor turning toward a tailwind component if options exist. The instinct might be to turn toward the nearest airport geographically, But if that airport is upwind, and there's a suitable field downwind, the field might actually be more reachable, despite being farther away on the chart. Configuration is the next factor. Clean configuration, gear up, flaps up, that's where published glide ratios apply. Extend the landing gear on a fixed gear aircraft. Well, it's already extended. But for retractable gear aircraft, dropping the gear can reduce glide ratio by 20 to 30% instantly. Flaps have a similar effect. Even the first notch of flaps adds significant drag. Full flaps can cut glide distance nearly in half. This is why the rule is, stay clean until the landing is assured. Don't extend flaps or gear until the landing spot is made. Meaning, even if everything goes wrong from that point, the aircraft will still reach the intended area. Turns cost altitude, and steep turns cost it faster. A standard rate turn, about 15 degrees of bank, has minimal impact on glide performance. A 30-degree bank turn increases the stall speed, and requires higher pitch to maintain best glide speed, which increases the sink rate. A 45-degree bank turn to reverse course can cost 500 to 1,000 feet of altitude, depending on how it's flown. That's why the impossible turn, trying to turn back to the runway after takeoff engine failure, is so dangerous. The altitude simply isn't there, and the turn consumes what little exists. Studies and real-world testing suggest that a minimum of 800 to 1,000 feet AGL is needed for even an experienced pilot to successfully turn back to the runway in a typical single-engine trainer. Below that, the math doesn't work. The turn costs more altitude than is available. This is why the conservative rule exists. Below 1,000 feet AGL on takeoff, land straight ahead, plus or minus 30 degrees. Above 1,000 feet, the turnback becomes possible but not guaranteed. Above 1,500 feet, it becomes more reliably achievable for proficient pilots. Turbulence and thermals add another variable. Rising air from thermals can extend glide distance significantly. Sink from descending air or mountain wave downdrafts can reduce it just as dramatically. On a rough day, glide performance can vary by 20% or more compared to smooth air. The conservative approach is to assume average conditions, not best case. Plan for the standard glide ratio, not the optimistic one achieved that one time in perfectly smooth air with a slight tailwind. Real emergencies don't come with ideal conditions. The reachability map is a mental picture every pilot should build immediately after engine failure. It's a circle, constantly shrinking as altitude decreases, showing what's within gliding distance at any given moment. At 6,000 feet AGL in a Cessna 172, that circle has about a 9 nautical mile radius. By 4,000 feet, it's shrunk to 6 miles. At 2,000 feet, only 3 miles. At 1,000 feet, just 1.5 miles. Every minute that passes, options disappear. The decision timeline starts the instant the engine fails. The first 5 seconds, establish best glide speed. The next 10 seconds, pick the best reachable landing spot. The next 30 seconds, run the emergency checklist and attempt a restart. Beyond that, commit to the landing area and refine the approach. Choosing the landing spot is a triage process. Airports are ideal, but might not be reachable. A long, wide field with no obstacles beats a short field with trees at both ends. Roads can work, but power lines and traffic are hazards. Avoiding populated areas and structures is always the priority. The rule of thumb: a field needs to be at least 3 times the aircraft's normal landing roll to provide margin for rough terrain, upslope, or approach errors. For a Cessna 172 that normally uses 500 feet, that means looking for fields with at least 1,500 feet of usable length. The high key position is abeam the landing spot at 2,000 feet AGL. This is the last point where the plan can change. From high key, the aircraft descends in a pattern, similar to a landing pattern but tighter. Low key is abeam the touchdown point at 1,000 feet AGL, positioned for a base to final turn. If the aircraft is high at low key, S-turns or slips can dump altitude. If the aircraft is low at low key, the field might not be reachable, and an alternate landing area directly ahead becomes necessary. This is the final commit point. Flaps and gear, if retractable, come down only after the landing spot is assured, typically on final approach below 500 feet. Not before. The temptation to configure early is strong, but it removes options if the wind or sink rate is worse than expected. The slip maneuver deserves special attention here. If you're too high on final approach, a forward slip, dropping a wing, applying opposite RUHTR, and maintaining a stabilized descent, is one of the most effective ways to lose altitude rapidly without increasing airspeed. It's not graceful, and it feels wrong. But when you're coming in too high over a fence, a forward slip might be the most important maneuver you execute in your entire flying career. Terrain dictates different strategies. Over mountainous terrain, valleys and saddles offer the best glide paths due to potential updrafts and smoother air. Over water, distance to shore becomes the primary concern, and survival equipment accessibility becomes critical. Over urban areas, parks, golf courses and wide boulevards become the targets. Avoiding buildings and people is paramount, even if it means a harder landing. The goal is a survivable outcome, not a perfect touchdown. Field selection also involves surface assessment. Freshly plowed fields are soft and can nose over an aircraft. Harvested fields with stubble offer more friction. Tall crops like corn can hide obstacles but may cushion the landing. Grass fields are ideal if the grass is short and the ground is firm. Power lines are the hidden killer. They're nearly invisible from altitude, and often cross fields near roads. The rule is to assume power lines exist near any road, and to aim for a touchdown point well away from roads if possible. Or to cross the road early in the approach, while still high enough to see and avoid wires. Communication throughout this process is vital when time allows. Squawk 7700 immediately. Make a Mayday call with position, intentions, and souls on board. ATC can alert emergency services, but the priority is always fly the aircraft first, communicate second. Your position call doesn't need to be perfect. ATC understands you're managing an emergency. A simple Mayday, Cessna 172, engine failure, 5 miles southeast of downtown, descending through 2,500, 6 souls on board, gives them what they need. They'll handle the rest. If you have time before touchdown, give them your intended landing spot. If you're committing to a field without an identifier, describe it. Landing in a field 2 miles south of the airport. This helps with a search and rescue response if things go wrong. The difference between aircraft types becomes critical in emergency planning. A Cessna 172 from 5,000 feet has a 7.5-mile radius. A Piper Archer, nearly identical at 9-to-1, matches it. A Diamond DA-40, with its efficient glider-like wing, achieves about 11-to-1, giving it a 9-mile radius from the same altitude. The Cirrus State Route 22 offers a unique option, the CAPS parachute system. Cirrus training emphasizes using caps below certain altitudes, or over inhospitable terrain, rather than attempting a forced landing. The decision altitude is typically 2,000 feet AGL or below, or immediately if over terrain where a landing isn't survivable. The psychological factor here is important. Deploying caps is not a failure, it's the design solution to an unrecoverable emergency. Cirrus pilots train knowing they have this option, and it changes the mental calculus of engine failure management. Multi-engine aircraft change the equation entirely. A typical light twin like a Piper Seminole or Cessna 310 can maintain altitude on one engine under the right conditions, weight, and density altitude. But if it can't maintain altitude, the glide ratio with one engine windmilling is worse than a single-engine aircraft, sometimes only 5-to-1 or 6-to-1. This is a sobering reality for twin-engine pilots. Single-engine glide performance is actually worse than comparable singles, and the larger, heavier airframe means the reachability circle is smaller than you might expect. The advantage of twins is the option to maintain altitude on one engine, not superior glide performance. Jet aircraft have surprisingly good glide ratios due to their clean aerodynamics. A Boeing 737 has a glide ratio of approximately 17-to-1. From cruise altitude at 35,000 feet, that's over 100 nautical miles of gliding distance. The famous Gimli glider incident demonstrated this when an Air Canada 767 ran out of fuel and glided over 60 miles to a dead-stick landing. The captain, Robert Pearson, was also a glider pilot. That glider background taught him energy management and the value of altitude, and it almost certainly saved that aircraft, and everyone on board. Glide performance calculations are one thing. Actually executing them under stress is entirely different. Proficient pilots practice these scenarios regularly, not just in check rides but as ongoing perishable skills. The best emergency glide landing ever recorded isn't the Gimli glider, though that's famous. It's the countless unrecorded, unremarkable safe landings by pilots who trained correctly, stayed calm, and made good decisions. Those don't make the news because nobody dies, and there's no dramatic narrative. That's the goal. An event so routine that it disappears from the news cycle because it was managed professionally from the first silent moment to the moment the wheels stop rolling. The practical lesson across all aircraft: altitude equals options. The higher the aircraft when the engine fails, the larger the reachability circle, the more time to troubleshoot. This is why maintaining altitude awareness during normal flying is so critical. It's why cruise climb profiles exist, why maintaining best economy cruise is more about stretching the glide envelope than saving fuel. Every 1,000 feet of altitude you carry is insurance. When the engine fails, if the engine fails, that insurance pays out in the form of decisions that weren't available a moment ago. A field that was unreachable at 3,000 feet becomes reachable at 5,000. A turn back to an airport that was impossible becomes a genuine option. The other critical insight: this isn't a seat-of-the-pants skill, it's math, physics, and practice. Know your aircraft's glide ratio cold. Know your best glide speed by heart. Understand how wind, configuration, and turns affect your reachability. Run the mental calculations during every flight, updating the invisible circle on the map beneath you. Some pilots will never need this knowledge beyond a check ride. Others will, and for them this information might be the difference between a successful forced landing and a tragedy. The engine will fail for somebody today. Maybe not for you, but maybe for you on a different day, at a different altitude, over different terrain. When it does, you'll have 7 minutes to make the right decisions. Understanding glide performance ensures those decisions aren't guesses. The reality of engine failure is stark, but manageable. The aircraft will glide. The question isn't whether you can reach a landing area. The math usually says you can. The question is whether you'll recognize which areas are actually within range, make the decision quickly enough to stabilize the approach, and execute the landing with precision. That's where training, knowledge, and mental preparation matter most. Fly safe, and give this video a like if it helped clarify how glide performance really works in the real world. We'll see you on the next one.